If you act as a megaphone for misinformation, we are going to hold you accountable.
Is this the most dangerous anti-free speech period in America's history?
How long do you think my prison sentence is going to be, do you think?
I mean, we're seeing calls for policing from the likes of Joe Biden, Tim Walz, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Bill Gates, to name just a few.
Even the U.S. should have rules, and then if you have rules, what is it? Is there some AI that encodes those rules?
But many on the other side warn that suppressing free speech leads to the erosion of democracy itself and ultimately paves the way for authoritarian control.
They are telling you the First Amendment is now a problem.
Joining me today to weigh in on this extremely serious issue is massively popular American political commentator Dave Rubin.
Most of yesterday's conspiracies have now turned out to be today's truths.
Dave is one of the original political YouTubers. He's the creator and the host of the Rubin Report, which gets millions of views each week, and he's the founder of Locals, a subscription-based community platform designed to protect independent content creators from the cancel culture mob.
Basically becomes an idea laundering racket. They're all kind of in on the lie.
Dave has been one of the most outspoken and active in combating growing calls for censorship in America and abroad, and he's here today to speak with us on that and so much more.
If they take away our ability to communicate and battle out in the arena of public opinion, then all you're leaving us is the other type of battle. And that will be very, very bloody and not good for anybody.
Let's dig in.
Keeping It Real with Jillian Michaels.
Dave, many are saying that free speech is on the ballot this election, that our First Amendment rights are legitimately in jeopardy. Is this true or is this paranoia?
It is not paranoia, and it is true. I can say that with a smile because I think we have a fighting chance, and I think the human spirit always figures out a way to beat the machine. I mean, I fundamentally believe David can beat Goliath, and I'm Dave, so I've always felt I've had a chance against big tech and big government and all of that stuff. But, every 4 years we do this usual thing about, this is the most important election of our generation or of our time or of whatever it is. And this one really is it. And I try not to talk in hyperbole. Everyone does it to some extent. I try not to do it too much. But as Elon Musk has been saying for the last couple of weeks, basically, if the Democrats win this election, they are telling you exactly what they want to do, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris or John Kerry or Tim Walz or any of the people that they are now connected to in big tech who have been stamping down on free speech as it relates to pushing against COVID lockdowns and all of that stuff for so long, and, January 6th and elections and whatever it is. They are telling you the First Amendment is now a problem. Hillary Clinton literally last week said that she wants control of the algorithms because they're losing, her words, total control.
Right.
I never signed off on having Hillary Clinton have total control over my speech and my thoughts. So I, for years I've been sort of screaming about the free speech thing, and I was kind of hoping that if enough of us screamed about it, that we wouldn't get put in the situation we are in right now. I was also screaming about how radical the Democrats were becoming, and that really old school liberals, which is still what I consider myself, and I think probably what you consider yourself, that classical liberals have way more in common right now, even with traditional conservatives who they might have some issues with on some of the social stuff, which I'm happy to get into if you want. But we have a much bigger fish to fry right now than the differences between old school liberals and conservatives. We have to stop what I would say is now this Marxist monster. It is a group of people, and Kamala Harris, it's like you can't even really, she's just a piece of the system. I keep calling her, she's the first AI candidate in essence.
Right.
Because there's nothing real about her. AI, we think of AI as just algorithms, or, that one day there's going to be a robot in our house that we're talking to that, seems to be sentient. But she really is AI. There's no original thought there. The system installed her after getting rid of Joe Biden. She obviously had a lot to do with that because, the only mechanism to get rid of the guy was the 25th Amendment, which she would have had to bring to him. That's a whole different topic. But the point is, she did something for the system. The system has now installed her, and she's just giving the system whatever it wants, which is why she gets these fluff interviews, which she doesn't even do quite well at. And it's why she can be as brazen as saying, we're going to censor misinformation, or Tim Walz keeps saying we're going to go after hate speech, or you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, which actually you can. You can't do it with the intent to do harm. But they have been so brazen about all of this. And the thing is, and then I'll shut up because it's only the first question.
No,
the thing
please.
is that if they take away our ability to communicate and battle out in the arena of public opinion, or even at our dinner tables, the differences that we have with each other, then all you're leaving us is the other type of battle. And that will be very, very bloody and not good for anybody.
So we're seeing this unholy alliance between big tech, legacy media, academia, our politicians. I mean, Joe Rogan just posted, I believe it was the New Yorker, I have all my notes here, that said something like, is it time to abolish the First Amendment? John Kerry.
Yeah, I think it was the New York Times. They do it every few weeks. Yeah.
You've got kids at colleges, along with their professors, seeking to deplatform people who come to speak at their campus and expose them to other ideas. It's infiltrating everything. And I can't understand how that's possible. And I don't want to go down the route of crazy conspiracy theories, but I do happen to see Kamala as a puppet of sorts. And I'm wondering, are we all being puppeteered? Is this an orchestration by some lunatic on high? Or is this just, how are all of these things converging at once, is my question.
Yeah, well, first off, there's almost nothing you could say where I'd be like, oh my God, you are a complete crazy lunatic as far as conspiracies, because most of yesterday's conspiracies have now turned out to be today's truths.
Right.
That's deeply dangerous, and I largely blame the mainstream media for that. We could go through all of the hoaxes or lies or quote unquote misinformation that the media pushed on us, really since the COVID years or since Trump. And whether it's Brett Kavanaugh is a serial rapist, or the COVID shot is going to stop you from getting and transmitting COVID, or that Jussie Smollett was lynched. We can, the Covington kids are racist, very fine people on both sides. I could do this all day long. I mean, there's like 100 massive scandals that they lied to everything about. So when people suddenly start waking up, they're like, uh-oh, am I a conspiracy theorist? Because the thing is, it's like once you pull that thread, there's a lot of stuff under there. And the danger as a society, Jillian, we're roughly the same age. So it's like when we were growing up, you turned on, so this, let's say 1985, I was 9 years old. I wasn't watching the nightly news at that point, but if you turned on 6:30 p.m. nightly news, whether you watched ABC, NBC, or CBS, they basically showed, it was a half-hour show, so, 22 minutes and plus commercials, and they basically showed the same information. And you pretty much just watched, I watch NBC because I like Tom Brokaw, I watch ABC because I like Peter Jennings, or CBS because I like Dan Rather. But the Overton window was kind of like this. There was a rough amount of stuff that was pretty much the same. Now, we could all argue that that's not good because the Overton window was way too narrow, and maybe they were lying to us about a whole bunch of stuff. But it kept society in some level of order, right? So
Right.
I think you can actually make an argument for that to some extent, not the full extent, but to some extent. And by the way, we can go back before that where there were less networks even before that, and Walter Cronkite was really the only trusted person, and then we can flash forward, and suddenly you have CNN and you have MSNBC and everything else. Everything becomes 24 hours, hyper-partisan. And then what happens, of course, is the internet. And what the internet allowed us to do was suddenly take video clips and see the full extent of them. So instead of the mainstream media, I mean, how many times have you seen this in the last couple of years where you see a clip on CNN, usually it'll be something that Donald Trump said or whatever, where they literally cut out the word not, or they cut out the punchline when he's making a joke about something, or the very fine people hoax, where he said there are very fine people on both sides, and they literally cut out the next sentence, which is, I'm not talking about the white supremacists or the neo-Nazis who should be condemned completely. The internet came around, and we started busting those hoaxes. And that is why they want to censor things so badly, because their grift, in essence, is up. More and more people are turning into shows like mine, and there are many other people who are just doing something, I would say, roughly closer to the truth than what these people are doing. But trust me, I say this all the time, and I genuinely mean it from the bottom of my heart. Like, if the media would just do a better job, and that cost me views and money and everything else, and I had to close up shop, I will find something else to do. I really wanted to be in the NBA. I could make that dream happen again. 48 years old, I got a torn ACL in my left knee, but I still got a finger roll. Like, and that really is the problem. So someone like you, I'm always interested in people that come to politics in sort of circuitous routes. So like, people that are just interested in politics all the time bore me to know. It's just endlessly boring, like DC swamp people who are just obsessed with how many Republicans are in the Congress or whatever. I'm interested in people who come to politics because they care about health. And then they suddenly learn something that, oh my God, we've been lied to, and this has something to do with the CDC or the NIH.
Yes.
Or somebody who is a teacher, and said that there are biological differences between boys and girls and gets fired. I'm interested in that. And there's many other examples of that. There was this guy, James Damore, who worked at Google about a decade ago, and they wanted him to take part in DEI stuff. And he was like, well, actually, there's reasons that men and women are different. And they fired the guy. I'm interested in those types of people. And that's what this new alliance that I definitely would include you in, and I would include people like Sage Steele, and I would include Zachary Levi and RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand. It's like there's this wild alliance of people who are just trying to get something true, to find some, or let's say, put it this way, to pilfer some kind of truth out of this nonsense and hopefully restore what America's founding principles were.
Dave, you bring up such a good point there, because the reality is I'm not political. I don't know anything about this. And the reality is that prior to the last several years, I didn't care. I would just check, 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 check. That was it. And I was convinced that we were right. And the truth of the matter is, I do align with the Democratic Party of about 10 years ago, most likely. But I am starting to see this erosion of universal truths like biological sex, like being overweight, it can be healthy at any size, these absurdities. And then outside of that, I'm seeing the most alarming things, like John Kerry saying the First Amendment is a barrier to the truth. Like,
if people go to only one source, and the source they go to is sick, and has an agenda, and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground.
Hillary Clinton suggesting that people who spread disinformation, which is absolutely, like, who's the arbiter of that? You bring up all these points of misinformation on both sides, suggesting people who do that should be criminally prosecuted and charged.
And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrent.
And now you've got Bill Gates saying, oh, you know what I think? Maybe an AI that can really filter through social media and weed out disinformation.
What is it? Is there some AI that encodes those rules? Because you have billions of activity, and if you catch it a day later, the harm is done. This
is so deeply alarming and dystopian that as a mom, as a global citizen, we're seeing this spread into Europe, into Brazil, that I don't even consider this political. I feel like anybody watching who tuned in about health and fitness, you'll get all of that. But by the way, did you know? And I think people are waking up because they are coming for them one at a time, the way you suggested. And I just had your former colleague, Anna Kasparian, saying, well, I got attacked in the streets. And when I was pointing out problems with the way the Democrats were handling crime, then they went after her and tried to purge her. When I suggested that you couldn't be healthy in any size, they tried to purge me. And I think so many on the left are still quite comfortable because it's the deplorables that are spreading misinformation right up until it hits home for them. So,
Yeah, well, interestingly, just real quick, I don't
please.
talk about her that often, but since you brought up her name, I mean, Anna Kasparian, that's exactly what she was doing to me and my former colleagues were doing to me. I was on the lefty Young Turks network. I started waking up to some of this stuff, and they've done endless awful videos about me and lied about me and everything else. From what I understand is what you just laid out there, because I've heard it from some other people. I obviously don't watch their videos, that now she's coming up against that. And the thing is that I believe the truth is the truth no matter what. So if she's willing to go down the road to the truth, she'll figure it out. But yes, they will not stop trying to destroy her. And then ironically, what always happens to all of these lefties who wake up to things is that they find that suddenly the conservatives, the sort of, and I don't mean conservative in the most traditional sense. Let's just say people that are broadly on the right are much more open-minded. They're willing to agree to disagree. They're willing to live and let live. There's a much stronger libertarian position as it comes to living your life. They may have their own religious beliefs or other things, but my own life is an example of that. As I started waking up from the craziness of the left, I started talking to some people on the right, like Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Jordan Peterson and Larry Elder and Glenn Beck. All of these people that I was told are evil, horrible bigots, and they hate gays. And
Yes.
and it was like none of it was true.
Yeah.
These are all people who I've broken bread with, who they've been to my home and sent us baby gifts. And my older son, his middle name is Jordan, in honor of Jordan Peterson, who was at one point told, we thought he was the leader of the alt-right. It's all completely bananas. And I would say that should give everybody great hope because, we can all feel very scared. This is scary stuff, talking about, in essence, the dystopian future that you're laying out. It feels like we're at the beginning of a sci-fi movie where it's like we all know we're entering this very weird place where the robots are kind of going to take over, and maybe they've already taken over. But in the AI movie or in the dystopian future movie, the sci-fi movies, usually everyone just kind of wanders into it blindly. The strange thing about the reality we're having right now is we're all realizing the algorithms are manipulated, and also, Grok, tell me what this is about that thing. So there's a very weird moment here in humanity where we're merging with the machines, and yet every bit of science fiction and I'm a big sci-fi guy and I've read every dystopian novel ever. Like every single one of them was warning us about this very moment. On top of now the political craziness that has just completely infected the algorithms, the system, whatever you want to call it.
I want to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Because I still have many, many, many friends on the left, and here's their position. So when you look at the things that people on high, the political elites, if you will, or the legacy media are calling for, and arguably censoring via surrogacy by pressuring Facebook and former Twitter, before Elon was in charge, to censor people. And I want to get into what happened when Elon Musk called you in just a moment. They're saying, well, now hold on. Biden said, you're killing people because disinformation on the vaccines. And just, this is the position, right? We're stopping people from protecting themselves and getting the necessary vaccinations. And vaccinations are a marvel of modern science. And I actually agree with that. To an extent, everything has a cost-benefit analysis. I wouldn't want to live in a world with the plague or polio again. But that said, you've got January 6th. You're inciting violence. You've got an autocrat. And I still, by the way, can't figure out if people were hurt on January 6th or not. There's so much conflicting information. But the argument they're making, bottom line, is that it's hate speech that incites violence a la January 6th. And it's dangerous medical misinformation, which jeopardizes lives. And the truth of the matter is, Dave, I do think that Trump has given them all of this, like a more reasonable person who is a bit calmer and didn't get everybody riled up on January 6th, we wouldn't have handed them these weapons to use as a tool to beget censorship. So then how do you address those people?
there's a couple things there, and please play devil's advocate as much as you want, or disagree with me as much as you want. Of course,
I don't. But I'm trying to do this so people aren't like, oh, she's captured. Sure. Like I am listening to them. I do understand, but and I really dislike the way Trump handles many things. He wouldn't have been my choice on the Republican side, and there were many candidates on that side that I preferred. That said, That said,
sure. So
yeah, go.
well, first, let me say we can talk about Trump in a second, but let me first deal with the initial part that you said. That in essence, what you said was, oh, okay, so some version of vaccines are good, and we have to make sure that people aren't riling up people for violence and things like that. I would say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That I don't think that the lefties. Most people don't realize that they end up being the bad guys in these situations, right? Like Hitler probably thought he was the good guy.
You think so?
And he was not, right?
Really?
So the
God, I think Hitler was like, when I look at people like Larry Fink, I think he knows he's the bad guy. I think George Soros knows he's the bad guy. That's why I kind of wonder, are these bad guys manipulating all of this information for financial gain? Because the reality is that I got deplatformed on TikTok, which I never use because I think it's where brain cells go to die. But it was suggested to me that I post a clip of a podcast that we did to bring viewers over, right? Utilize your social media platforms, Jill. Done. I took a clip of Dr. Sabine Hazen, who's done clinical trials for drug companies for 30 years and is one of the most respected gastroenterologists in the space studying microbiome. And she was explaining the reasons, the mechanisms why ivermectin was actually an effective therapeutic for treating COVID. I posted it, deplatformed off of TikTok. One reel, Dave. One.
Right. No, believe me, I get it. I've been fighting YouTube, basically for a decade. I would say, though, to answer your question, I mean, look, knowing you're actually the bad guy versus doing bad things are different things, right? Most people that do bad things think they are the good guys. But putting aside that sort of philosophical point for a moment, I think the broader problem is, first off, as it pertains to, let's say, hate speech. Well, we have the First Amendment in the United States, and it has very few exclusions, but there are exclusions. You can't yell fire in the crowded theater with the intent to do harm. You can't gin up a crowd. Everybody go kill that guy. So direct threats to somebody. And then we have unbelievably specific laws related to libel and slander that almost never get used because they're so unbelievably legally narrow. And that's probably good because that allows more people to say things. And yes, you're going to hear people say mean things about Dave Rubin online. I can't sue all of them. That's the price you got to pay, right? It's the same thing for you, right? Like, could I just sue everybody? Like, we don't want that either. I don't want to get too lost in whether Trump riled up the crowd on January 6th. He did say go peacefully protest. Now, you might argue his behavior beforehand and convincing these people the election wasn't legit or all of those things. Mm-hmm. But I would say the good intentions of the left, we don't want anyone to be riled up about anything, doesn't give you a right to silence people. By the way, these are the same people who for years have been telling us about microaggressions and trigger warnings, and now they're marching with Hamas. So there's an intersectional conflation of ideas that has really led to, I would say, the obliteration of true liberalism on the left. And again, that's what puts the liberals more on the right these days. As far as Trump specifically and what you're saying, that there's things about him you don't like and some of the behaviors, and he makes it too easy for his opponents. Yes, I agree with all of that, of course. But what I said before I ended up voting for Trump last time, and I did not vote for him the first time, I voted for Gary Johnson, who is the libertarian. As for Trump, the thing that I said when I did vote for him the second time around was everyone wants what you just said there. You want the right policies and you want maybe a more statesman-like person and everything else. But I would say the analogy is a bull in a china shop. The analogy is not a panther in a china shop. What we all wanted was a panther to walk into a china shop. We all saw something wrong, the things that Trump talks about. There was really something wrong with the system. It's exactly what we're talking about here right now, and deep state and health and all these things. We all wanted a panther to walk into a china shop, real slick and sly, bang over one thing with its tail, knock over one thing with its shoulder, walk out and calmly close the door. But that's not the analogy, and analogies are analogies for a reason. We got the bull in the china shop, and I would say the bull in the china shop has been a net positive far more than just allowing the China shop to remain untouched.
Okay, and let me dig in one more.
Sure.
He's going to be a dictator. He's an autocrat. He's authoritarian, so on and so forth. Now, that said, when I point out we did 4 years and that didn't happen, I get January 6th. Now, we'll table that. We talked about that. My question becomes, isn't that exactly what I'm seeing on the left? How are they
Yes.
determining who the arbiter of this truth is? So I have so many questions. I'm trying to organize which one I want to ask in which order. I guess my first question is that you've got misinformation, which someone's made a mistake, but we want to arguably criminalize that, according to Hillary Clinton. You've got disinformation. I deliberately misled you. And then you've got hate speech, which I presume they're claiming incites violence. All of the misinformation or even, quote, disinformation during COVID that they wanted to silence turned out to be the truth. Masks don't work. The vaccine is really a shot, not a vaccine. It's not super effective, and only a certain percentage of the population really should even consider getting it. Those are who are at great risk. Like, all of these things that they went after people for turned out to be true.
Well, look, that's also why, generally speaking, you should want what the founders of America wanted, which was a limited government. Because when Hillary Clinton says we have to censor misinformation, well, you just laid out a whole bunch of misinformation that these guys have promulgated. Right. Again, very fine people, all of the COVID stuff, like Russia hoax, the Hunter Biden laptop.
The Steele dossier that she was behind. I loved Hillary Clinton. I'm not going to lie. There's probably an article quote out there from me in 2016 saying I wished I had trained her for her presidential run. I worked with the Clintons, Dave, and they were always lovely to me. Chelsea Clinton was on my television show in 2015. Personally,
well, I think I think what's happening. So look, I voted for Barack Obama twice. And I'm trying to remember what was Bill Clinton's. Could I vote in '96? I guess no. I supported him, as a young adult, but I don't think I could vote if I remember correctly, if I'm getting the years right. But the point is, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, while I have all sorts of issues with them now, the reason that Hillary now seems, let's say, hysterical to you, where you supported her like 10 or 15 years ago, is because she let the enemy in. What you have to give the credit to the progressives, and I would say whatever you want to call them, the Marxists or the communists or the jihadists. I don't even know what you want to call them, because it's a whole crazy group of people. But you have to give them credit. You have to give the devil his due. There is a reason they were able to, in essence, take over the Democrat Party and not the Republican Party. They took over the Democrat Party because of the soft underbelly of tolerance that liberals put at like the height of the hierarchy of importance. You should be tolerant. Everyone should be tolerant. You should be tolerant of people who think differently and act differently and have different cultural traditions or norms or anything else, but you don't want to be tolerant of intolerance. But the progressives really saw this. They saw, how could we take over a political party? We'll pretend we're nice and we care about everybody and we're empathetic and all of these things. But then once we get in, we will unmask ourselves. And they have clearly unmasked ourselves. So someone like Hillary Clinton, she's been a Democrat for so long and is so associated with the Democrat Party that she just sort of can't accept the reality. So she basically strikes me as someone that it's like, she's just lashing out in any way to maintain some level of relevance or control in the system, right? She should, if Hillary Clinton really cared about America or really was a true liberal, more in line with the way her husband governed as president, she should be doing what RFK did. Right. But now they have an aversion to Trump that stops them from doing that. But by the way, had it been DeSantis, who I supported in the primary, who I think is the most competent politician in America, and just look at the last couple of days of what he's done here in Florida as it relates to the hurricane, it's like they would have done the same thing to him too. They would have said he's worse than Hitler because he's basically Trump with a calculator. He's too effective.
Don't say
so he's
gay,
even worse.
Book burner. I've heard it all.
All made up nonsense. Here, I'm in Florida. I said gay. I might do something gay later, Nobody's coming for me. So that's really the problem. The left has just unfortunately now been led by its worst instincts. And that's why everything feels so out of control right now. That's not to say everything on the right is perfect. I have differences with people on the right, obviously. But what I see as any ability for us to get through this thing that we're all feeling right now, Trump has to win this election for it. There's almost no other, I don't see any other alternative. Like, they are telling us, we will censor the hell out of you.
Yes.
We will take your guns. We want 8-month abortions. Like, there's nothing even remotely moderate on that side anymore. I'm sorry, that's just the case. And on the right, look what's happened. Donald Trump was the first president ever to come in first time around being for gay marriage. Barack Obama did not. Donald Trump, yes, he reversed Roe v. Wade via the justices that he appointed, but he's not for a national abortion ban. And I would argue kicking it back to the states is way more moderate than 8-month abortions that they want in California and in
such bad evils,
and in Minnesota, et
Dave.
cetera. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
I know, like, that's the part that I really struggle with, because I can definitely see the nuance on things like abortion. Of course I can. And of course I would never be for late-term abortion. But we were the party of legal, safe, and rare. And
Right.
I could argue barbarisms that have occurred due to forcing women to go to different states and just a host of evils there that's so deep on both sides. And babies being born alive from botched abortions on the left. You are forced to pick an evil. But I refuse to say that I agree with anything he did there. I don't. But if I am forced to pick an evil like you're saying, okay, do I want a child being aborted in the 8th month? Of course not. But if I had my druthers, I would like to see some federal protections for women up to a reasonable point. And I'm certainly no
Sure.
expert in this category. And I get what but that is the problem, right? Is that you are now looking at a scale of issues that you don't like on either side. And the left, for me, is no longer the left. It's like, it just, here's the left, bigger, bigger, bigger problems. And the right seems to actually be more moderate, more welcoming to gays, more welcoming to people with differences of opinion on their side, more willing to have these conversations. And I want to put my tin hat on here for just a moment.
Yeah. Wait, can I just say something quickly about
Please.
abortion? Because I can see that's an important one to you. And I would say, listen,
It's
I'm
tough,
begrudgingly
Dave.
yeah, it's super tough, right? I'm not a woman. I'm never going to have an abortion. I don't believe that your politics should all be based on your immutable characteristics. We should all have equal opinions on things. But I can understand why this one is so important to women, right? But I would say, look, and I wrote this in my first book, there should be some negotiation about when, look, unless you're going to have a complete
Rules.
abortion ban, which I'm not
Rules.
for a complete abortion ban, obviously.
Yeah.
So then let's say 12 or 14 weeks might be the thing that most people can agree on. I'm actually completely fine with that. But the reason that I would argue, and I think you disagree with this, which is fine. The reason I would argue that the reversal of Roe v. Wade was the just thing is that what Roe v. Wade did, it had nothing to do with whether abortion was legal or not. It made it a federally guaranteed right. And that the only things that are federally guaranteed are things that are in the Constitution. Everything else is sent back to the states. So again, as someone that is begrudgingly pro-choice, abortion is not in the Constitution. It was supposed to be sent back to the states.
I don't want
And look,
other
I live
people
in
voting on my right to
No, I
marry
get
my
that.
wife or my daughter. God forbid she does get pregnant at 17 and this happens and we are responsible. Ideally, she'd be on birth control. It fails through birth control. Ideally, we'd get the morning after pill. Maybe she didn't realize it got through the IUD. Now we're 3 months and she's found out she's pregnant and she's 17. I want my child to be able to make that decision. Now, if she
Sure.
got past that, it's like, I agree with you. It's somewhere in that there's a continuum here of 9 months that we're working with, and there should be a cutoff without question, in my opinion. But I don't
Sure. So
want somebody making that decision for me.
Right. So in that, look, you're taking the old Democrat position, which I think most people think is the rational position. I would say, I think maybe the one thing we're slightly seeing differently here, and again, that's fine, is that to me, if you reverse Roe v. Wade, you actually allow more choice into the system. I'm not for. So the one disagreement that I think I have politically with DeSantis, who again, I just told you was by far the best governor in the country, is the 6-week thing. He did the heartbeat bill. And I was actually at an event with him. There were only about 100 people there. It wasn't televised. Before he was able to, it was before his reelection. So before he was able to put the heartbeat bill in. And he said that it was his personal belief, and he's been voted in as the chief executive, and that if he gets a second term, he's likely going to go for it. And that's the thing. So in Florida, I don't think Florida should be able to pass a law that would stop someone from leaving and going to get an abortion in California if they needed it. So the point is, I just believe in as much choice as possible. That's the purpose of the laboratory of democracy that these 50 states are. Some states have high taxes so they can put a lot of money to education. Now, ironically, usually that leads to pretty poor state-run education. Some states have, 8-month abortions. Some states have 6-week cutoff. All of these things allow for the constant tinkering of the best way for a society to work. And you have to decide what place you want to live within that system. If you think 8-month abortion is the most important thing, I'm not talking about you, but if someone listening to this thinks 8-month abortion it is far more important than immigration, it's more important than foreign policy and everything else, then move to California. If you think that law and order is important, if you think that lowering taxes and not having income tax so people can build businesses and have more in their pocket to spend, well, then I would say move to a place like Florida. If you're somewhere in between on all of this stuff, maybe Colorado's right for you. But that's a beautiful thing, because in France, you don't have that ability. In England, you don't have that ability. In Canada, you don't have that ability. So I believe that we have the right system in place. We just have a lot of bad actors within the system.
I will never agree with you on handing it to the states. I have seen so many horrible things happen to women in those particular situations, being put in that position. And then you're also seeing it lead to women being forced to have even later term abortions, because it's like, I got to get the money to travel out of state, to leave my home, to get this procedure, and I have no one to take care of me. Like, I can't go there with you on that, but I would say that's okay.
Sure.
And I agree with you on most things. But this is something, shifting gears on you one more time, I want to go a bit deeper down the rabbit hole on something that I don't even think you would follow me this far. So when we look at, back to kind of the censorship, free speech conversation, you're seeing things like the Hunter Biden laptop and the Facebook files and the Twitter files, where you've got the left knowing the Steele dossier is not real, knowing that the Hunter Biden laptop is real, and then effectively leaning on the media to either censor something or put out disinformation. That has to come from an extraordinarily nefarious agenda. I mean, the NIH does hold patents to the COVID vaccine. It's extraordinarily profitable, whereas a therapeutic that's been around for 30 years, that won a Nobel Prize, that nobody makes any money on, is not. I mean, I get that this is crazy town, but the raw economic incentives make sense when you look at the behavior being so bad. Why is this allowed to happen, do you think? And can you also talk a little bit about what happened when Elon Musk called you with the Twitter files?
Sure. So first, I would say, there's a line from George Carlin. I'm going to slightly butcher it. Everyone thinks that conspiracies are this grand thing with these people just sitting in a room plotting, like in The Simpsons when they have all of the, bad guys, Mr. Burns, like lining up all of the bad guys, or the Legion of Doom, fighting the Super Friends.
Yes.
But George Carlin talks about how it's not really that. It's just like if you have a bunch of people whose interests are pretty much aligned, you might get a conspiracy theory pretty quickly, actually, because they might be able to pull a certain amount of strings. So, first off, I think part of the problem is we've done such a poor job in education in this country that so few people have been skeptical until now.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a genius. I am not. I talk for a living. I get some things right. I get some things wrong. I think I'm a pretty good listener, which has allowed me now to be able to communicate the ideas that I believe in an effective way. But why is it that if we were to go through all of the hoaxes, including all of the COVID nonsense of the last decade, let's say, I pretty much got all of them right. I didn't get my election predictions right. I thought Donald Trump was going to get the last election, so I don't get election predictions right. I thought DeSantis was going to beat him in the primary. I really did. But the big issues, I get them right. Why is it that I didn't go on air and demand that my audience get vaccinated? Or why is it that when Joe Biden said, you're not going to get nor transmit COVID, the next day I was on air like, I don't think that's right. Why is it that a month after that, in July of 21, I tweeted out that the vaccines are not working properly and we're about to get vaccine mandates? And I got banned from Twitter for that. And actually, to the point of your second question, Elon, once he released the Twitter files, Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio told me at the Capitol that that tweet was taken down in cahoots with the government. You do not get a letter from the government. You don't get $5. You don't get anyone to give you a pat on the butt. You get nothing. So my First Amendment rights were violated, and you really have no recourse, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. But so I think there's a bunch of things happening here. It's partly we are so, too many of us, we've grown up. It was so damn good. If you grew up, again, roughly around our age, you grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was so damn good. Nobody thought it was good to be racist. Nobody thought it was good to hate the gays. It doesn't mean that there were mean people and there might have been a bully here and there and whatever. But I keep telling people, man, if we could just reverse this thing right now to 1995, and then know in 1995 what might be coming our way if we don't start thinking about things seriously. I think a lot of us would take that chance. Like I'd fire up the DeLorean and get the plutonium from the Libyans and the whole thing. You know what I mean? Fire up the flux capacitor and do that. So I think it's a lot of stuff. I mean, I think there's a conspiracy. The conspiracy you're talking about is that we now have institutions that just became too fat. Anthony Fauci should not have been in government for 40 years. Donald Trump, who I've clearly said a lot of nice things about here, he got rolled by the deep state. I would say he did a better job than Biden because Donald Trump was never for mandates as it became to the vaccines, which Joe Biden was for. That's a big difference, But look, Donald Trump also was for warp speed, and that pushed through the vaccines. So nobody's hands are completely innocent here or bloodless here. But when you have a populace that maybe has grown fat on the success of capitalism in America, that is distracted with algorithms and porn and other and video games and everything else, you're probably going to get into a situation like we're in right now, where people who have a certain amount of power, their interests align to see how much power they can take. And I think that's kind of where we're at. I don't think it's like sitting down in a room. Yes, there is the WEF and there are these things, but I don't think it's as calculating than that. I think it's just it's sort of more entropy in a weird way than pure old school conspiracy.
That gives me some hope. And I often wonder now, as I look at things and they seem insane to me, if I go back 30 years, you see it begin. But you're right, everything was good. But when I look at health, perfect example, we've all seen my colleagues, if you will, Callie Means and Dr. Casey Means, giving the statistics that are absolutely terrifying. It's like 1 in 30-something kids has autism. It used to be 1 in 100,000. 10% of kids in the 70s or adults in the 70s had obesity. Now it's 74%. And infertility, autoimmune conditions, early onset cancer diagnosis. We've seen all of these scary statistics. But it started 30 years ago, and now that pot that the frog was sitting in has really grown to a boil. People are dying, people are hurt. So in my line of work, you're seeing the culmination of 30 years of corruption play out now in real time. The consequences have come into effect. The canary is dead in the coal mine. And I'm
Right.
wondering how long this has been happening in your line of work, because you saw it. You saw it a while ago, and that made you start locals. And you've made all of these predictions, and you've been right. What did you see that we didn't see? Because I saw this, by the way, in my line of work. I wrote that book 15 years ago. It was called Master Your Metabolism, and I said all this was happening. And now everybody's waking up to my industry and what's going on there. You are that person, in my opinion, in your industry. You saw it all coming. How? You saw it earlier than it was
well,
obvious.
first, let me jump. I will answer that obviously, but let me jump into your industry for a moment because, the thing that affects all of us, no matter what your political stripes are, is health. And I've actually been so thrilled in the last, year or so. It's really, I would say, in the last 6 months, where Bobby now has really just pushed this "Make America Healthy" thing again, and now this new alliance that I'm talking about with Tulsi and all these people, where Trump is now embracing health, and we're talking about yellow number 5 and all the things that and people who watch about all the poisons we put in us, and seed oils and all of these things, and that they tricked us not to eat red meat and all of these things. Over the last couple of years, I've really changed my diet and workout routine and everything. I had developed when I left the left. So this will connect it to the second part of the question. So when I left the Young Turks and Anna, who you mentioned before, and I was getting all this unbelievable hate from these people, including her, by the way, I was getting all of this unbelievable hate. I developed alopecia areata, which is an autoimmune disease where you lose huge chunks of your hair. And I lost probably like 40% of my hair, huge gaping holes everywhere. I went on crazy experimental medication. I had every piece of blood work done. I thought I had cancer or God knows what. And nothing really helped until I changed my diet. And I got rid of a lot of carbs. I always ate relatively okay, but I got rid of a lot of carbs, a lot of sugar. And I'm basically doing some kind of modified carnivore diet. I eat a ton of red meat. I eat a lot of pasture organic eggs. And I eat greens, but that's basically it. I do drink some tequila, but I don't eat all of the processed stuff. I'm not eating Fruit Loops with yellow number 5 and the rest of it. But the point is, when you talk about how that got into the system 30 years ago, again, is it a conspiracy theory that a bunch of bigwigs were like, okay, let's put all these poisons into the foods to kill everybody and have them die of obesity and everything else? Like, if you were a businessman, it's not a great business model because you're killing people, although then you might go, well, they're in cahoots with the health people, and the health people can now put drugs in them to extend their lives and keep them. You maybe could make that argument, but I would say a probable better argument would be a whole bunch of industries were born out of the Industrial Revolution. Television magically appeared. Then people were eating TV dinners, and that was not going to be as healthy because it was frozen and processed when just, weeks before they were having fresh, peas at the dinner table. So I think it's not necessarily all this directed conspiracy as much as it's like everyone just saw the opportunity. Back in the old days, you could only eat what was near you, and now you can have literally any type of food from any country on earth, in essence, with any spice that they could never have dreamed of. So let me put that there for a moment. As this all relates to creating locals, it's completely connected to all of this. I went independent after I left the Young Turks, and I was on Patreon, which you may be familiar with. Patreon was the crowdfunding platform where basically, if you were just doing anything, whether you had a political talk show like me, or you were a video gamer, or basically anyone that wanted to have people subscribe to you, they created the tech for that. And I was on there, and Jordan Peterson was on there, and a couple other people, and they banned a guy. Without getting too in the weeds on this, there was a guy he goes by the name of Sargon of Akkad online. His name is Carl Benjamin. He had said the N-word on a show, not his show that he had on YouTube, not his Patreon account, on some other show. He had said the N-word not to be racist. He was making fun of people who use language like that. He was making fun of the alt-right type people, and Patreon kicked him off the platform with no warning. They said, you're done, you're out. This is a guy with a family, a wife and kids. That's how he made his living. Anyway, that happened, and Jordan Peterson and I decided that we were going to end our Patreon accounts. I was making, I had a company at the time. That's how we did the show. I was making probably 90% of my revenue from Patreon. But what I did was I sat down with my brother-in-law, who's a tech guy. I said, can you build me a monthly subscription service? And we built it quickly. And then suddenly we were like, wait a minute, this is working for me. Can we build this for other people? And can we make sure that they own their data and that there's no middleman with the payment system and a series of other things that got got us out of the muck of big tech where they just control everything. You know, I have 3 million YouTube subscribers. I don't have any of their email addresses. Like we just did everything right,
Yes,
basically.
I understand.
And because of that, the company eventually merged with Rumble. Rumble subsequently went public, and I think we, alongside Twitter/X, are on the forefront of the free speech movement as it pertains to tech.
Will they come for you too? And what I mean by that is we all thought we were safe on social media. Now we know we're not, right? So they're forcing people like Mark Zuckerberg to silence dissenters on Facebook. We know they did that with Twitter before Elon Musk owned it, and you were part of exposing all of that. You were one of the journalists that he tapped to expose that. Now you're telling me that they did infiltrate Patreon to some extent, whether it was ideologically capturing them or leaning on them to do it. How soon until they come for Substack and Locals and how are there any protections legally for your platform? Can they change the law to take that away? Like, is there going to be nowhere to hide? Is my question.
Well, we could do this for we could have like a 12-hour conversation right now on all, and we'd need about 50 lawyers to get through all of this and technologists and everything else. The simple version I can give you is that basically we're in a race right now. It's as simple as that. We are in a race to basically build better technology before the machines get us. So we're basically in the Matrix right now. You know, like the machines are coming to get us. We've got our ship. We're the band of rebels, and we have to outsmart them and outpace them. As I said before, I think good wins. I think truth wins. Okay. So I do think we have ways around this. But I would say specifically, look, this is why people should be for Bitcoin. Everyone should have a little bit of Bitcoin because you can have a peer-to-peer transaction without the big guy involved. It doesn't mean because you're selling drugs or anything else.
Right.
But you should have some stored value so that you and I could exchange value without government involvement. Okay, so they don't like Bitcoin because of that. That's one thing. I would say, can they come for everybody? Well, you may have seen Hillary Clinton this week said that we should look at the Section 230 laws of the Communication Act. And basically what that says is that means that platforms like Twitter or X, Facebook, et cetera, they have more protections around speech than, say, a publisher. So Daily Wire is a publisher, meaning that, Ben Shapiro and those guys, if they say something on their site, that they could be sued for that because they're the publisher of it. A platform is basically open for everybody. And the reason that Hillary wants to reverse the 230 protections is she wants Twitter and Facebook and everybody to be legally liable for all the speech on there because that will force them to have to basically censor everybody. You understand? So the second you say to them, okay, your legal protections are gone around speech, and mean things that people say and everything else, well, then congratulations. Mark Zuckerberg now has to spend the rest of his life like whack-a-mole trying to make sure that nobody says anything that could be perceived as mean on his site. Otherwise, he's going to get sued. So I get why people don't want those 230 protections, but I think if we strip them away, free speech will get that much more chilled. No one will want to build a platform anymore because they're going to be like, oh, anyone that gets on here can basically end up suing me or someone else because they say something mean will sue me. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. But I would say, yes, can we build a better mousetrap than these people? Of course we can. Bitcoin is in essence decentralized payment, but there's decentralized storage. Rumble right now is building cloud storage, which is now already, it's already in effect. So, Amazon AWS, that's how they took out Parler after January 6th. They just basically blew up Parler, which had 23 million users. Well, if you're not on Amazon AWS, you can now join Rumble Cloud. That's one way of getting around some of this. But we will be in this fight forever. That's the real answer to your question is this fight will be here forever. There will always be people who want to silence people. There will always be people who want to invent. And I would rather be on the side of the invent people. It's a little messy on that side. You're going to hear some things you don't like, and people might be mean occasionally, but it's way better than the other thing.
Speaking of Section 230, I have some experience with this. And the irony is I actually think it was Bill Clinton who gave the social media platform Section 230. And the reason I bring this up, and I'll lay out my argument for taking away some of it, is simply because, again, is there nuance? Like the way you and I were talking about abortion. Well, late-term abortion is honestly disgusting. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
But putting women in a position where they're bleeding out in cars is also disgusting. So where's your continuum? Okay, so for me, Section 230, I had a historic lawsuit with Lionsgate because they took all of my DVD content that they were supposed to be paying me on when they would sell a DVD, and they put it all up on YouTube for free. And they took the advertising revenue, and there were hundreds of millions of views. And we sued them, and we won, and we won a lot of money. But the reason I couldn't get YouTube to stop and say, hey, that's my content, this is illegal, it's being pirated, is because they were totally immune. And they profited off of my content through advertising dollars. In addition, we spent so much time going after people who were pirating the content and then profiting off of it. And YouTube was like, nah, like not our problem. And then on the other hand, I interviewed a gentleman, I haven't put the show up yet, but it's wild. So he wrote an article called Gone in a Snap. It's on Rolling Stone. It was censored through the social media platforms because it was all about kids buying fentanyl on Snapchat and dying 20 feet away from their parents' bedroom, ordering it up like a pizza. And the way that they were allowing these drug dealers to target kids and suggesting these connections, it's diabolical. And they knew it. And they aren't working with law enforcement at all to stop it. You've got that. And then I've got Kara Swisher sitting here a month ago explaining to me how all of these evil things are happening to our kids on this platform. And so that's where I'm wondering, like, should they be responsible? They're not regulated at all.
So there's a couple of pieces here. I mean, first off, if you're selling drugs to kids, there are laws against that in the United States. So of course, if they find out you've somehow put up a video that's going to trick a kid into buying drugs on YouTube or something, you got to go after who did that. And then YouTube should have the internal policies to take that video down and everything else. The real question here is how much power do you want to give the government to force everybody to do all these things? And that's just the endless debate. It's sort of the debate we're having about everything. But I would say there's another part of this that maybe in some ways sounds like you won a nice lawsuit, which is great. And it's annoying when we all see it's great like in the aftermath, I guess. But we all, even though you probably would have preferred not to go through
Dave. It was a nightmare. But yeah, I hear you.
But do you remember, I'm a big basketball fan. I remember watching NBA on NBC in, 1992. And, after 3 times a game during the commercial break, they'd say, this broadcast cannot be licensed, replicated, without the expressed written consent of the NBA and its properties, something like that. Well, now if you go on YouTube, you can get virtually every NBA game in history, or at least clips of it, and they're uploaded by random people and blah, blah, blah. So now I watch all those things. I love them. I love watching the old clips and Jordan with the shrug and all of that stuff, right? Now, the question is, do we want YouTube to be responsible for taking that down? Or if the NBA decided that stuff should get down, that it should be able to be taken down because there's a legal mechanism for it, should YouTube spend all of its day chasing down every video of Magic Johnson in the finals? Or the NBA, which owns the IP, should they be focused on it? I would argue it's the people who own the IP. And clearly, by the way, the NBA, and it's not just the NBA, you can get every episode of The Golden Girls or Family Guy or whatever you like, basically pirated on YouTube. Right. But clearly the companies behind them have said, oh, there's a reason it's good to have them out there. It keeps us kind of viral. It keeps people reminded of us. It keeps, I've seen every episode of Seinfeld 1,000 times, but like if I think of something funny to a friend, I can just send them that 15-second clip because I can find it like that. That's the way the world has turned. So it's like, there are probably cases. I did a stand-up special that we put behind the locals paywall. Some of that got leaked online, and then we made sure that got taken out because it was my own IP behind a paywall. But if somebody
you've
rips
got to be able to make a living, for goodness sake. That's the thing. Like, I sell fitness. I don't engage with big food. I don't engage with big pharma. This is how I make my living, to try to, when they erode that stuff, They make it so hard to fight back, though, Dave. Like, I proved that they didn't have the right to have that up there, and YouTube did not care. That's what I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
is
listen, Dave Rubin is literally the last person on earth that you're going to get on your show to defend YouTube. So in no way am I defending. Trust me, I'm not defending YouTube in any way. I'm just trying to bring up some of like the philosophical reasons that some of this stuff being there actually ends up being there, and that in a weird way, it often can be a net. You know, let's put it this way. So if your videos are now on YouTube, even if you're not profiting from them, but there's Jillian Michaels videos all over the place and they're being clipped everywhere and everything else, that keeps people talking about Jillian Michaels. That keeps people sharing Jillian Michaels things. There's ancillary benefits to you in that. I fully understand what you mean about intellectual property, of course. I mean, we have people that literally watch my videos, take the exact thumbnail, the exact topic, and then just replicate it, 5 minutes later. I guess I could be constantly chasing people down and figure out the legal means to do so. Yeah. But I think ultimately, if you create something, which you do, if you create something, create it, keep seeing where the new avenues are, and keep building. Like, there will always be the bad guys on the way to come for you.
I understand. I
think the bad guys are here. I don't know if you hear my my landscaper just got here. We're going to deal with that.
I don't hear them. I do not.
Unless it might be the government. Hold on. I'll make
it. Could be. It actually could be. So let's, we joke, but I don't know. At this point, I actually think it's possible that you could get that knock at your door at any given moment. I have some questions about the legacy media that I was wondering if you could shine some light on for me here. So the private piece, right? The fact that when you look at who owns the largest share of CNN or the largest share of MSNBC, it's companies like BlackRock and Citadel and Vanguard. When I try to get information out there about health and it impacts their bottom line, they will not air it, Dave. In other words, if I do, first of all, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, they won't even have a conversation about Ozempic. I was able to have one with Dan Abrams on News Nation, and I'm grateful that he gave us the time for the debate and the platform to do so. However, he made it very clear that he is overwhelmingly pro-Ozempic. God forbid the advertisers get upset. Now you've got Fox, and they are willing, shockingly so, to allow us to talk about, hey, this has some dangerous side effects, and hey, look what's going on with Big Food, this, that, the other. My question is the fact that many of these new news organizations are privately, or hold on, let me rephrase. A lot of these news organizations, a lot of the legacy media, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they're owned in large part by private people. Is there a fundamental problem with that? Or is it just like,
I don't have a problem with, personally, I don't have a problem with private ownership. And I think the less that is just sort of governmental, I think is actually good. Again, because I think competition is good. However, that being said, at the height of COVID, I almost dropped the F-bomb, but every freaking, every fucking news show on CNN and NBC and MSNBC was brought to you by Pfizer. So while they're bringing people on to tell you to be injected with things, it's brought to you by Moderna. Like, that is criminal. That actually should be criminal. And by the way, in most countries, most westernized countries, pharmaceuticals cannot advertise the way they can. I haven't had cable TV and I can't even remember how long, but I do remember watching commercials. Every other, commercial would be for some antidepressant with a woman who's being chased by a cartoon cloud and she's depressed. And then she takes that drug. Then the second half of the commercial now tells her she's going to have diarrhea and restless leg syndrome and thoughts of suicide. And then she has to take another drug for that. And then the whole thing, like, she wasn't really that depressed. Next thing you know, she has restless leg syndrome and diarrhea. Now she's kind of depressed. It's all insane.
They effectively buy the narrative, though, and that's the problem. Do you think that's why people are losing faith? But what would be, again, it's like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it somewhere in the middle? It's just like, or do we use our common sense and vomit that back up, leave and go watch the Rubin Report, which is what I've done personally. I'm being honest with you. That's honest to God how I found you, is I was watching legacy media recognizing the corruption. And I realized, I was like, I can't trust this anymore. There's so many issues here that corrupt their ability to deliver me the truth. That seemingly being one of them.
Why do they get almost every major story wrong? Why? There is a reason for it. They are at this point, I don't know how someone with a straight face could say that CNN is an impartial news organization, right? Like the idea was CNN, the most trusted name in news. That's utterly laughable at this point. It's completely ridiculous. I could never lie that much in a day on my show. My director, Connor, here has been working for me for 5 years now. Like, he would punch me at the end of the day if I just, you'd hit me. You would hit me hard. Every day. He's a baseball player. He would bring a bat in and crack my skull. If every day I was just lying endlessly. But the thing is, what people need to understand is, let's use MSNBC as a better example in a way because it's so obviously ridiculously partisan.
It's ridiculous.
It's utterly ridiculous, right? They push all of the hoaxes over. So think about the very fine people hoax.
Yes.
Donald Trump says this thing, then he says, I'm not talking about the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis. I don't know if you saw it, but on Real Time with Bill, I'm sure you've seen that.
But I don't know. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, the quote, of course. I don't know if you saw, I was on Real Time with Bill Maher, and I'm sitting next to James Carville, who's like this legendary Democrat activist. And Bill brings up Charlottesville, and then he spits out the very fine people line. And I said to them, guys, I was like, well, you do know that the next sentence was, I'm not talking about the white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And James Carville literally just crumbles. If your guys want to throw it in B-roll on the show, he's like, blah, 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 blah. He can't speak, and he like crumbles onto the table.
Are there good people on both sides of Charlottesville? I don't know. Did I hear that, or did I make that up? That Trump said there are good people on both sides.
He didn't say that.
He did not. He
said it, but a sentence later, he said, I'm not talking about the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis.
Well, yeah, after. It's like Elon Musk.
It was badly phrased. I think we can agree on that.
It was inelegant.
Now, how is it that 3 years after that thing has been debunked 1,000 times, this guy thinks he can go on a show and repeat that nonsense? The reason he thinks that is because he's protected. He's protected by the mainstream media. So it basically becomes like an idea laundering racket. They're all kind of in on the lie, and that's why nobody gets out of the lie. That would probably be the best way I could describe it. They're all in on it. Why are they in on it? Well, if you're an activist, not a journalist, I would say Dana Bash, Jake Tapper. I'm not saying they're the worst people on earth, but they are Democrats. Stop pretending you are not a Democrat. Why is it that all the stories you get wrong always either are in service of the Democrats or to take out the Republicans, basically with no exclusions? Why is that? Why didn't I fall for the Hunter Biden laptop story and the 51 CIA people who said it was a Russian whatever, and I didn't fall for the COVID stuff or any of these other things we've talked about? Is it because I'm a genius, or I was just kind of like, something's a little weird here, and I'm going to kind of think about it a little bit before I start screaming. And that's what we need a little bit more of. And Jillian, I would say that's the beautiful thing, because if that's what brought you to me, and if that's what's bringing Bobby Kennedy to Trump, yes, and that's what bringing Elon into this coalition, and this wacky group of people that disagree on all of these things, including abortion, but if that's what's bringing us together, the messiness of reality, and the desire to further freedom and understand that it's going to be a little wacky, like, again, that's the train that I want to be on.
Why are so many of them left-leaning, though? That's another thing I don't understand. Like, they're all left-leaning except Fox.
Right.
How? Why? Is there a reason, or just 'cause?
No, I think there's like literal ideological reasons, meaning that culturally the whole country has gone left over the years.
Okay.
And liberalism, which has been associated with the left, liberalism when it's the fight for equality. So when liberalism was the fight so that it would be a liberal notion that Black people should not be slaves and should be able to vote. Now, ironically, it was the Republicans who were fighting for that, because things have switched many times over the years. I mean, that's literally why the Republican Party was formed. It would be a liberal notion for gays to be able to be married. It would be a liberal notion for women to be able to vote, meaning equality, so individual rights and equality. But then it got sort of put on hyper steroids. I think really what has happened is if you want to track when we can deal with a certain amount of insanity, there's a certain amount that's okay. It's a little craziness in the system. Everybody's got a wacky cousin. There's some weird thoughts here and there. When it all went bananas, basically, was probably 2 months after gay marriage got legalized. Now, gay marriage, of course, I think is a completely just thing. My husband's gay. It's great. Okay, fine. But what happened was,
I'm with you.
so the
I'm with you on
activists,
this one.
yeah, and they're just fine. They're fine. What happened was the activists basically were like, oh, well, there's almost no area now in America where anyone is not equal under the law. There really was nothing left. So what they did is they came up with this crazy trans thing. Now, we can all, I don't want to get too far into it, we can all have sympathy for someone that's confused about their gender identity and genuinely is part of that 0.001% of people and blah, 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 and what they should be able to do to their body when they're an adult and everything else. But the point is, they then radicalized the most, like the craziest, smallest minority you can imagine. And then they weaponized it against everybody to then attack science, actual science.
Right.
Men and women are different. They're, all of these things. And then they racialized it. And then they threw in the oppressor-oppressed narrative, which has all of the same people that Hamas would love to behead now are chanting in the streets for Hamas. I mean, gays for Palestine is very different than Palestine for gays. So there's so much that they have just absolutely demolished here that I don't even remember what the question was, but I think I made a point while saying all that.
You absolutely did, and you did answer the question. Speaking of something somewhat unrelated, but you brought up Bill Maher. Back in January, I was on his podcast, and we were talking about Joe Biden's mental fitness. And behind the scenes, the doctors that I've interviewed for years, because I was predominantly focused on health on this show, were telling me, like, hey, Joe Biden has Parkinson's. Like, they could see it a mile away. And of course, it's gotten exceedingly worse, which Parkinson's does over time. Everybody saw it. And they all denied it, which is crazy, until it fit their agenda of like, okay, now's the moment. We pointed out, we staged this coup. And Dave, you called it. I need to send you this episode. You and Megyn Kelly said exactly what was going to happen. You guys said, listen, there's a rumor that right before the DNC, they're going to punt him. They're going to slot somebody in. I don't even know if you remember talking about this. But I remember.
I do.
I was watching you, only you and Megyn. And I said to Bill, I go, do you think there's going to be this crazy coup and to avoid like a nasty primary and he's like, get out of here. How did you know? You heard it through but nobody reported on it. Nobody reported on it. And not only did they not report on it, they reported the opposite, that he was the Joe guy, Morning Joe. Oh, he's sharper than
he's horrible.
ever.
Yeah.
Like, what a liar. He's lying. He knows. So the legacy media is doing it on purpose, Dave. For what
Well, that gets
reason?
to the point that we were talking about earlier. If you're on MSNBC, you are literally paid to lie. Nobody could be so bad at their job
Okay, so
like
just,
Joe
just
Scarborough.
Is that. Got it.
Right. That's the thing. You have to understand, Joe Scarborough sits in that chair and gets paid millions of dollars to lie. That's the point. You can't get so many things wrong as a journalist, so many obvious things wrong as a journalist, and keep your job. It makes no sense. Joy Reid cannot be nearly as racist as she is and keep her job unless she's paid to be racist and to lie. But that's what they are put in that chair to do. And a giant corporation puts them in that chair to promote a certain set of ideas. That's not a crazy conspiracy theory or anything else. When you're right, that moment with Joe Scarborough, it was like 10 days before they finally took out Biden. He's sharper than ever before. He's sharper than me. It's like, dude, that is so bananas ridiculous. If you can find my tweet from that day, I'm sure I tweeted out something about how I think I said something to the effect of his brain must be worse than Joe Biden if he actually believes that, but he obviously doesn't believe it. I would say it's not that Megyn and I are clairvoyant or I didn't have any insider information. But if you've been in this game and you're tracking all of the nonsense for so long, you can start to see how the game is played. And it could. The reason you said then they all run cover, but then at some point it gets through the airlock. because because you can't stop the truth. So what happened in this case was they really were intending to run Biden the entire way. They did not expect him to break down this quickly. And then by moving the debate up, they did something very clever. And I think in some respects, Trump fell into the trap on it. The debates normally, the presidential debate normally is in the fall after the primaries, right? So he would not after the primaries, after the conventions. So you've already had your convention. He's been nominated. Now you have your debates usually in September and October. They moved this thing to June. When Trump went up there and Biden just completely failed miserably and no one could deny it. So if you watch the shows that night, they want to run cover for the Dems. They don't want to get up there and say Trump won, but it was so damn obvious that you have Van Jones literally crying on CNN. The people of MSNBC couldn't even run cover. So then the plan went into action. Okay. That's basically, so you can look back. I have a video, the earliest one that I know of for sure. I have a video on my channel from 2019 where I was saying that Joe Biden has cognitive problems and I don't think he's going to finish out the term. Now, he may finish out the term, but in essence, he obviously has not really been president. He's not really pulling the strings. The man barely can speak a sentence. And by the way, coming from your line of work, health, and I'm very interested in brain health and nutrition and how it relates to that. And I had two grandmothers who both had Alzheimer's. That one particularly, I spent a good year of my life at the geriatric doctors with and dealing with all that stuff. So I have great sympathy for that. But what they use this man. And now there's a funny ending to this story, potentially, which is that in the last couple of days, I don't know if you've seen this, but he's really been throwing Kamala under the bus with this DeSantis Florida stuff. So I think what's happening basically is they put the screws to him. Kamala was like, we're going to 25th Amendment you. He gets out of the way. And now as we're rolling into the last month of the election, whatever's left in his brain that can still do something, and it's probably coming from Jill, they're kind of trying to screw Kamala, which I'm totally fine with, by the way.
They're pissed. Yep, you can tell. Yeah. I'm actually surprised. To be honest, I would respect her a lot more if she invoked the 25th Amendment now. Like, are you guys, we're on the brink of a nuclear war, and I don't want to hear that we're not. This has got to be the most dangerous the situation has been in my lifetime. I wasn't around for the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it seems pretty damn serious. You've got the situation in the Middle East that's just escalating every single day. And he's saying, we're working around the clock. Mind you, there's video clips of him sleeping on the beach. Why are they not doing that? I feel as though I would respect it so much more. I would feel much safer. It's definitely the tough thing to do. But I would say, like, hey, you did the right thing. You did the tough thing. I feel safer. I would gain some respect there. Why are they not doing
what you're
that?
What you're also asking for is a degree of transparency. Part of the problem here is that we all saw the thing with Biden. We knew it. Again, they're not letting it be seen because they're just lying to us about it, right? Do you remember that 2-week period right before the debate where they were basically like, there's all these edited video. What did they call them? They didn't call it deep fakes. They called it cheap fakes, where suddenly there were all these cheap fakes of Biden bumbling and stumbling, but they're all edited and everything else. When he went to the G7 and all the other leaders of the countries are looking at the guy who had just landed with the parachute and he's just wandering off into the forest, basically, and Giorgia Meloni from Italy has to grab him. But they were called it a cheap fake. At some point, their lies become too much. They can't deal with it. But I completely agree with you. I think had Kamala honestly, had whoever, we know it's Pelosi and Schumer and Kamala and Obama, basically, had they really been honest with the American people and said, guys, post-debate, we see what you see as well. Listen, it would have still been disgusting because they allowed for no primary, right? But if they would have said, we see what you see and here's what we have to do because this is not safe for the country or the world, I would at least have a little more respect for it. But instead what they did was they did it all behind closed doors, and now they're basically pretending that they didn't do it.
Right.
And then I'm sure you saw it, Joe Biden goes on The View 2 weeks ago and basically says, hey, I thought I was okay and I didn't want to step down. So what the hell is going on here?
I want to provide people with some solutions. So my first goal with this episode is that somebody who is still communicating and friendly with people on the left sends it and says, hey, just watch, just listen to what Dave says. and fact check it. Do your own homework. And if you're sufficiently alarmed, reconsider your position, or at least have a greater understanding of your friends and family who have moved. I actually haven't moved, but are now considered center or right. I want that. The second thing I'm looking for are some solutions of fighting back. And I know everyone's like, oh, vote Trump. But Dave, I don't know. I don't think it's that simple. What can we do now? Is it no longer digesting legacy media? Is it getting Substack? Like, what are some solutions?
I think the political, at the federal level, there is an election. And I get why you might have an aversion to Trump and everything else. But
if he's the lesser evil, in my opinion.
Yeah, like the thing is, look, if you care, to me at this point, you have to vote Trump. It does not mean he's great. Okay, we don't need to do that thing. Everyone gets it already. But I think that at that level, but that's not really the answer. The answer is not really political. The answer is personal, and it's spiritual, and it's philosophical, and everything else. Look, at the height of COVID, I lived in Los Angeles with the insane draconian lockdowns and everything else.
Same.
I fought very hard for the recall of Gavin Newsom, who I think is genuinely as bad as it gets in politics. I campaigned with Larry Elder. I got audited by the state 3 days after the recall. I put my house for sale that day, and I moved to Florida. And in America, because we have states' rights, which we talked about earlier, you can move to a state, you can move to a place that is way more in line with your values. Now, if abortion, let's say, had been at the top of my hierarchy, we didn't have the 6-week thing then, but we definitely had more. It was around 12 weeks, which I was completely fine with. But maybe I wouldn't have moved to Florida if I had put abortion at number one at that point. But the point is, I would have had plenty of other places to move. But now I live in Florida, where we have no state income tax, so I'm saving a crazy amount of money. It's not why I moved, but I'm saving a crazy amount of money, which means I'm able to put more money into my show. I'm able to hire people. And guess what? We have police, and they're better than the California police because we're getting all the ex-NYPD people who were great police officers who are treated horribly by the mayor of New York, so they move down to Florida, and DeSantis gives them a bonus, so we have better policing. But it's not just policing. Because we're a strong Second Amendment state, I have several guns now. I didn't have any before. And because we're known as a gun state, it keeps everyone, you can't walk into Lululemon like you can in Cali and just walk out and take some stuff. Because if I walk into Lulu and I like those workout tops as much as anybody, I'm going to get shot. A grandpa at the mall might just shoot me. Yes. So we have there's an unsaid exchange of civility because we're taking responsibility for our lives. So I would say the answer is that if someone's watching this and you live in Seattle or you live in Portland or New York City or wherever, and you see it devolving, don't be part of the devolution of it. You can get up and go. And then when you get to that place, know why you got there and vote the right way and act in accordance. I would say the most simple thing you can do, and we all need community while we're doing this. Like one thing that I really try to do when I'm walking my dog every day, if I see a neighbor, I always try to say hello to them. Because, if the shit ever hit the fan, your neighbor is way less likely to bust into your house to steal something if they know you and they know you have kids or they know your kids or they've met your dog. Like have a little sense of community too. Don't, if you see, we do this often, like we don't have a lot of trash in our neighborhood. I live in a nice area, but like if I see trash on the ground when I'm walking the dog, I pick it up. Like do a couple things to not just be like, can't somebody else do it? Because guess what? Somebody else ain't that great. That's just how it is.
You're absolutely right. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. Obviously, I will have it in the show notes. Everybody knows about the Rubin Report, but can you please just give them the spiel of where we can get more from you all the time?
Well, first off, this was an absolute pleasure. I can't believe we haven't crossed paths. Well, we've texted a little bit over the years, but that we haven't met in person yet is completely insane. So I would prefer to do that in Miami, but if you really want me to go to crazy LA, maybe
No, Miami it is, 100%. 100%.
Okay, we will do that. We will do that in Miami. I will make you the best grass-fed Wagyu tomahawk you have ever had in your entire life.
I'll bring the tequila.
You bring the tequila. I got some pretty good tequila too, but we got all sorts of good stuff. The best place to catch me really is on the platform that I created, rubinreport.locals.com, where I have direct communication with my audience. There's no big tech middleman, and you can help keep the show independent. And if you don't want to pay anything, that's fine too. You can just read stuff. You just can't interact directly with me, which we thought was an interesting way to get back to sort of where we started. We thought that would be an interesting way to do things, like pay if you can, and if you can't, You'll still get stuff, but there's going to be some stuff that is separate for the people that are really supporting the effort.
Of course, and they need to. That's the other thing is people don't want to pay for subscriptions and it's another cost. But the reality is that if you don't spend that little bit on the Substack subscription, on the local subscription, you're going to unfortunately be at the mercy of whatever the agenda is at MSNBC or Big Food, Big Pharma, whatever the advertiser is that says what you're allowed to know, what you're allowed to hear. I think truly that this might be the most effective way to protect our freedoms is by supporting these platforms, by supporting people like yourself so that you can say the truth without being silenced, without being punished. So that's my spiel on it. And I cannot thank you enough.
I will keep trying if you keep trying. How about that?
Done. Thank you so much, Dave. I can't wait to meet you in person. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.